Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today's session. It looks like a few more people are waiting to get in. We'll get started in just a moment. All right, welcome everybody. My name is Krista Egger and I lead our Green Communities work at Enterprise. Today we're gathered to discuss how to create green affordable housing with the New York City Overlay of the 2020 Green Communities Criteria, a green building program with a long track record of New York City, designed for the affordable housing sector. Today's session is the third of 4 sessions we're holding this month. And today we're going to be explicitly discussing HPD's new solar requirements and how those intersect with the 2020 overlay of the Green Communities Criteria. And I'm really grateful for Jen Leone with HPD, Noah Ginsberg, and Annika Wistar-Jones of Solar One, and Frederick Zindel with Green Communities for all preparing for today's conversation with you all. Shelby O'Neill with Green Communities is also here to assist with the chat of today's session, and Gabby Morris-Flores is on the line to help make sure your experience with Zoom is a good one. So we've got a good team here to support you, and I really appreciate everyone putting in the time to do that. Speaking of Zoom, if you are experiencing any difficulties with connectivity, try closing other windows and browsers that you might have open. That usually increases the speed of Zoom. But if you're still having issues after you've done that, just drop a note in the chat box and we'll try to help you out however we can. So don't be shy and let us know what you need from us to have a good experience today. And we are recording today's session, and we'll email that file for you all to share with your colleagues within the next week. And when we share that recording, we'll also include links to the recordings of the 2 previous sessions this month, in case you'd like to listen back. And these recordings include the visuals, the audio, and the chat log of each session, so you should have a full experience, even if you're not listening in real time. And speaking of chatting, we really do encourage you to chat all throughout today's session. We'd love to have a just continuous chat going on at the same time as that we're doing the presentation. We'll be trying to answer your questions in chat in real time. We'll be holding some of those to address to the speakers once they're done with their presentations. And for any questions that we're not able to answer in real time today, we will make sure that we share with you answers before the start of next week's session. So please don't be shy and use that chat function. So with that, I'm going to share a couple of slides to give you a little bit of an orientation into today's session. So here's the cover with the title of today's session. And as you all know, this is just one of a series of the 4 sessions that we're having this month. Next week will be our final session, and that's when we'll be focused in detail on the energy efficiency requirements of green communities, the templates that are new for your use, and how those correspond with Local Law 97. So really hope you all will join us for that. With today's session, we have 2 main workshop outcomes. So by the end of today's session, we expect that we will have reviewed HPD's solar requirements, including the solar approval form and feasibility analysis and how to comply with those. And then we'll also identify how a project team's choices with solar will impact other aspects of their green communities application. For the agenda, I'll share a little bit of context with you now about the path to zero. Then I will turn it over to Jen and Noah and Annika for HPD solar requirements, then to Frederick for the connections between the solar criterion and other criterion in our program, and then we'll wrap with questions at the end. Some of you all might be wondering how this is different than years past, how the 2020 criteria addresses solar differently than 2015. And would just like to state that efficiency has always been required and points have always been available for solar with green communities. But with the 2020 overlay, the significant change is that all projects will be required to assess their feasibility for solar. You don't necessarily have to install solar, but to assess opportunities. And Frederick will share all those opportunities with you all later. And another big change is that we've arranged our category 5 in green communities along this path to zero that you see on your screen here. So we have mandatory criteria that you see on the far left in orange about energy efficiency. And then we have a variety of optional criteria on the path to zero after that about increasing efficiency, installing renewables, going to zero energy, or thinking about electrification. So this is the context in which we're working and some of the big changes about how solar is part of the program. I'm going to take these slides down and share something else with you all. And that's our criteria site, actually, our criteria website. So I'll drop the link to that in the chat. So if you'd like to go here, you can, along with me. And I'd also just ask for your patience as there's construction happening right outside of my window. In case you can hear that, I'm sure you can all sympathize with that. But if you'd like to view the 2020 criteria in the New York Overlay, you'd go to this webpage, and would just like to remind you all of the filter that we have available for New York. So if you look on the bottom right side of the screen, you'll see these different options. Depending on which buttons you select, different criteria will be available or not. And the key for all of you is to select urban and then New York City so that the overlay is visible for you all here. And once you've done that, you can click in any of these categories and see the full requirements for the New York City overlay, for the different criteria that you choose. And you can also go to the checklist section of the website. If you'd like to see a shorthand version of the criteria, we've got an Excel version for you here, a PDF version for you here, and an online interactive version for you down here. And then the last thing I'll show you here on this site is the section of the website that includes templates for certification. So if you click on templates for certification, you'll be able to pull up all of the tools that will ask you to submit when you're applying for a pre-build or post-build. And for today, we'll be looking at the ones associated with 5.3b. So the solar approval form, HPD solar screening tool. And I'd like to point out that there have actually just been some recent updates made to the solar screening tool. So we'll have that updated link on here in the next few days, but wanted to orient you to where this is. So that's a short orientation to the site, an overview of what we'll be speaking about today. And Shelby, are there any questions that we should address before I hand it over to Jen?
No questions, Krista. Just a reminder to folks to please mute your mic if not speaking.
Okay.
Great.
Shelby. All right, Jen, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, here we go. Start from the beginning. All right, hold on one sec while I have some difficulties. There we go. So thanks, Enterprise. Thanks for the introduction. I don't think I need to reintroduce ourselves, but we are going to talk about the HPD solar where feasible mandate. So I'm sure anybody listening in is very well aware of the recently implemented local laws 92 and 94, requiring solar on all new roofs and new structural roofs for all project sizes in New York City. Projects that are financed by HPD can waive out of this requirement leading up until 2024 by providing a waiver, but through Enterprise Green communities or also projects that are waiving out of Enterprise Green must do the solar where feasible mandate through Enterprise Green. And what does that mean? We've mapped out a plan to make sure that we are aligning where it makes sense with the intent of the local laws and establishing a sustainable roofing zone and putting on the sustainable roofing zone green roofs, solar, or recreational spaces. We're really mapping to the local laws. And this will help us make sure that we put solar everywhere solar everywhere it makes sense and not leave affordable housing out of the picture because there's so much opportunity there. Solar at HPD is not new. We've been working on solar for years across new construction and our preservation programs. I am going to now turn this over to Noah and Annika from Solar One, and they are going to talk about solar. And also, they've been doing a lot of work with us at HPD on some of our prior solar installations.
Great. Thanks so much, Jen. So I'm sure that all of you who are on the line today are very familiar with Enterprise and very familiar with HPD, but likely not familiar with Solar One. So I'm going to quickly introduce our organization. We're a New York City environmental nonprofit. We've been around for about 15 years. We have 4 major programs. We have a green worker training program. We do environmental education in the public schools. We have a park that we manage on the East River, Stuyvesant Cove Park. And then I direct our Here Comes Solar program, which is a technical assistance program that works to make solar energy accessible in high barrier market segments. And affordable housing is one of our primary areas of focus. The description of kind of the services that we provide is laid out on the right hand of the slide. But let's move to the next slide, which is just a little bit of context setting about the importance of solar for the city. So clean energy and solar power in particular is key to any climate solution for the city. Buildings account for 70% of the city's greenhouse gas emissions, and rooftop solar is one of the most feasible ways to reduce those emissions with on-site generation here in the city. The Climate Mobilization Act and the State Climate Leadership and Communities Protection Act are putting a price on carbon, and local laws 92 and 94, like Jen mentioned, mandate solar or green roof on new construction. Solar also benefits our electrical distribution system. It's hard to get power to all of our buildings with our current infrastructure, and we're certainly feeling that right now during the heat wave. Solar power reduces electric bills. That's, I think, a big one. It's one of the few capital improvements that you can make to a building that pays for itself with reduced operating expenses, which is obviously very important for affordable housing. And then last but not least, solar creates local employment opportunities and economic development because that's local construction work that can't be outsourced. So with that context set, I'm gonna pass it to my colleague Annika, who's gonna give a quick overview of solar technology, and then I'll run through solar economics before Jen dives into kind of the nuts and bolts of the solar cost feasibility screening tool and how to comply with the new requirements.
Thanks, Noah. So many of you said that you were familiar with solar when we registered for the webinar, but some of you didn't, so we'll do a quick 101 before we go into the feasibility tool. Jen, you can go to the next slide. This is a basic diagram of how solar works. Solar panels produce electricity. That electricity goes to the building. Anything that you're not using immediately is sold to the grid, and you get a credit that you can use later when the solar panels might not be producing, for example, at night when it's dark, but you turn on all the lights. So over the course of the day, whether the solar panels are producing or not, the solar covers your entire electrical demand, depending on the size of it. Next slide. A couple basics about solar panels themselves. Solar panels have at least a 25-year operating life. They have a warranty of 25 years. That means they're best on new roofs, which is one of the main reasons why we're really excited about this, this new solar mandate, because solar panels can go on a new roof, and then the lifespan of the roof and the lifespan of the solar are the same, and they'll complement each other. Solar panels are incredibly low maintenance. We recommend that the super of a building check on them, do a visual inspection maybe once or twice a year to make sure nothing's blown up on them or gotten dislodged or something, but nothing more than that. There's no moving parts or anything that needs regular maintenance. They do, however, require direct sunlight. So that's one of the reasons why the feasibility assessment is important to make sure that the location of the solar panels will be viable and financially worth installing them there. So there can't be shade from nearby taller buildings or trees, although that's not really an issue in New York City. And they are grid connected, which is a good thing because it means that when the solar panels aren't producing electricity, you're still getting energy from the grid. What it also means, though, is that they can't provide backup power if the whole grid goes down unless you connect batteries. And in New York City, at this point, battery systems are both very expensive and very difficult to permit. But what you can do is install a solar system, and then later on, when battery technology becomes cheaper, when the permitting becomes easier, then batteries are very easy to connect to an existing solar system. And so that can be added later on. Next slide. There are three major types of solar installations for New York, for flat roofs, so specifically in New York. The most common is a ballasted array. This is close to the floor of the roof. It's weighed down by weights as part of the racking of the solar array, and that means that there's no roof penetration. So it's the cheapest and easiest way to install solar. The next option, if you need more power produced in a smaller area, is a planar array or a mechanically integrated array. That's where it's integrated into the structure of the roof. And as you can see, when the solar panels are closer together in that kind of shed structure, you can fit more into a smaller space and produce more power for smaller roofs. It's a little bit more expensive, but it works well for many buildings. And then a canopy array is like a planar array, except it's raised 9 feet in the air, and it can cover the entire roof area, go over any kind of obstructions, any HVAC units, or if there's a roof deck, canopy arrays work really well with those. However, that is the most expensive option, unsurprisingly. There's more engineering, more materials that go into it, and so it can be a good option for some buildings, but it's not always the most cost-effective option. Next slide. For multifamily buildings, there's usually 2 ways to distribute the solar credits. The most simple way, and what most people do, is using the solar power to offset the common areas. So that's, the hallway lights, the laundry room, elevator, security system, that sort of thing. Another option for some buildings is to take that power and split it between all of the apartments in the building with what's called community shared solar. This only works if the building's roof is large enough to support it, and if the building owners are willing to go through the extra work and paperwork to make that happen. But it can be a really good option to provide direct benefit to the residents of the building. So that's definitely one thing that's worth exploring. Keep in mind that when you're sizing a solar system, doing electrification measures like heat pumps or VRF can significantly increase the electrical needs for a building, and so the solar credits required. Next. So I'll turn it over to Noah for some of the more financial aspects of solar.
Great. Thanks, Annika. So we can go to the next slide, which is focused on solar costs. So we'll get the savings. That's what everyone wants to hear about. But first, you need to pay for it. Solar energy system costs are typically presented in dollars per watt DC of capacity. You have 60-watt light bulbs, maybe you have 300-watt solar panels. It's really just the rated output of the system or the system size. And dollar per watt will generally, there are some main drivers here. So price per watt will increase for a system if that system is small, just because there are fixed costs associated with getting building permits, mobilizing for construction, and all of that. Price per watt will go up for mechanically attached systems. There's just more physical labor involved in the mechanically attached systems, more hardware, more coordination with roofers. Taller buildings will typically be a little bit more expensive to install solar on, just because you need to run conduit to bring your power that you're generating on the rooftop down to the electrical room, which is typically at the ground floor or in the basement. And then another thing that will drive up your cost on a dollar per watt basis is creative system design. So again, the canopy can be great when you've got dual use of a roof space, if you're using it as an amenity for residents, for example, and it can allow you to get more solar onto a roof. But as Annika mentioned, that is a more expensive option. The price per watt will decrease if a system is larger because you get some economies of scale. Ballasted installations tend to be the lowest cost, primarily because it's fast to install, and there's less labor associated with the construction. And then bulk procurement, running an RFP, getting bids for multiple solar projects at once, and lining up those projects to get some efficiencies on construction mobilization, equipment procurement, and all of that can also reduce costs, in our experience, typically between 10 and 20%. So those are some of the major cost drivers. And we can go to the next slide. And so next we want to talk about solar incentives. So solar incentives do vary by building type, but there are a lot of them that are available. And so I'm going to run through them from left to right on the top. So the first is the federal tax credit for solar. This year, the federal tax credit for solar projects is 26% of the upfront cost of the system. The tax credit is stepping down over time. Next year, it drops to 22% before it drops down to 10%. So there's certainly benefit in moving ahead with solar projects sooner to secure a higher federal tax credit. There are ways that you can, even if you know that you're, let's say you're working on a new construction project this year and you know that you're not topping off the building until next year, so you couldn't put solar on this year, you might still be able to qualify for the 2020 tax credit by purchasing some of the equipment this year, which is an approach that's called safe harboring. That's often used to maximize the tax credit. The tax credit is applicable in a residential, in an owner-occupied context, or in a rental context. If you have a low-income housing tax credit syndicator, they'll often take the solar investment tax credit along with the low-income housing tax credits. In an owner-occupied scenario with a co-op or a condo, the residential version of the tax credit will get distributed to shareholders pro rata. And then with nonprofit rentals and supportive housing, you often can't access that incentive unless you have a syndicator. There are creative financing strategies that you can use to get the benefit of that tax credit, but it can be a little bit harder. There's a state tax credit, which is really only applicable for owner-occupied properties. There's 100% year one bonus accelerated depreciation, which can be of real value to in some cases to tax credit syndicators, but more likely to for-profit owners that have a tax bill to offset. And then there's a property tax abatement for solar in the city, although in most cases that's not relevant for HPD solar projects. One that I note that's not on this table is an important one. It's the NYSERDA incentive. The New York State Energy Research and Development Authority offers an incentive for solar projects. On affordable housing, the incentive is currently $1 per watt for the first 200 kilowatts of any solar project. And that's a really generous incentive that will cover, anywhere from, let's call it 25 to 30, 35% of the cost of a system, depending on its complexity. And there's actually an additional incentive that you can get if you're distributing those credits directly to residents within the building via community solar. Next slide. Great. So the payback period for a solar project here in the city, if you can monetize those tax incentives, if it's a low-income housing tax credit deal, you might be looking at something as short as a 3-year payback period. And again, these solar panels have a 25-year warranty, so really compelling economics and long-term financial benefit to the property. Even for those developments, supportive housing and otherwise, that nonprofits that maybe can't take those tax incentives, solar can still pay for itself between the NYSERDA incentive that defrays a significant portion of the upfront cost and your annual utility bill savings. Solar energy systems will typically pay for themselves over their operating life. Next slide. Great, so this is just an example project. This is a new construction project, Arthur Avenue Apartments up in the Bronx. We facilitated procurement for this project earlier this year. It's a new construction project, 4% low-income housing tax credit deal. There was a prevailing wage requirement, a 70 kilowatt solar array. This is a mechanically attached system. And it's a 7-year payback period for the owners. It's going to deliver, after it pays for itself, it's going to deliver another estimated $171,000 of lifetime savings to the development. So it's a net positive for the development. This project is under construction as we speak and will be turning on any day. Next slide. Great, so this is just a screenshot of the solar cost feasibility tool for this specific project with actuals plugged in. So you can see that the economics are really compelling here. 11% IRR, you can see a breakdown of all of the incentives. I think we don't need to spend too much time on this slide because next Jen is going to be diving into the solar cost feasibility tool in a bit more detail. So with that, Jen, do you want to take it away?
Sure, thanks for the good explanation of solar and solar incentives and costs. So I will now talk about our cost-effective solar mandate. And, you know, we don't have maybe the catchiest title to it, but it's, you know, what we've embedded into the overlay. So let's start here. Criteria 5.3b, that's why we're here, states that all HPD finance projects are required to submit an HPD solar approval form and either install solar based on what we determine is feasible through the feasibility analysis, or install a green roof over 90% of the project's sustainable roofing zone, or, excuse me, voluntarily comply with local law 92 or 94. If a project has a solar array and it offsets less energy consumption, then 1 point will be granted to the project if at least 90% of the project's sustainable roofing zone includes solar. So let me go into the details about how this really works, which is, I'm sure, what a lot of people are interested in. So first of all, this is a new piece of the Enterprise Green process. This is a piece of a flow chart that some of you who attended the first training session 2 weeks ago will recognize. The middle piece, this is the Enterprise Green pre-build authorization. That's pretty familiar. That's what we've been doing for years, where the development team submits a package to the HPD project manager and myself, and we review it. What's new here is that this solar feasibility analysis is a component of the process that's never been there before and has to happen before the pre-build authorization. Why do we need it early? We need it early because the best solar installations are happening concurrently with building design, right? We want rooftops designed in such a way that everybody's maximizing solar, maximizing recreation, ensuring that bulkheads and equipment and everything else is designed to make the most beneficial roof. What needs to be submitted is a roof plan, a solar approval form, and a solar screening tool. That gets submitted. It gets submitted to the HPD PM and my office. We review it, and then we will return the form saying whether the solar installation is approved, waived, or we need additional information. And again, you need that signed form to kick off the pre-build authorization process. So what is the solar approval form, and what does this process really look like? First of all, the first piece of the solar feasibility analysis is this form. You'll fill in some basic information about the project and include 3 required items, which I mentioned: the roof plan, the solar screening tool, and I'll go into that in a minute, and there's a spot for a narrative or additional information, which is optional. This form asks for basic information about a solar installation, the type, what, canopy, ballasted, so on. What is the system size? What's its estimated production and year one energy savings? The system cost, netting out the New York Sun NYSERDA incentive, and the system cost after all the other incentives are taken out. And what the goal of this is for us to look at this at HPD and say, okay, this is a solar installation that makes sense. Or the project is asking for a waiver, or what I should say is they're asking for waivers because they're either installing a green roof, they can't accommodate a 4 kilowatt solar array, or the project doesn't meet a 10-year payback period, which is really basically what we're calling a feasible solar array. So this form will be filled out. There's instructions on the back, and it will include the following items. A roof plan, because we can't assess any kind of solar installation without seeing it. And on this roof plan, the designer will note, FDNY access, basically the solar roofing zone. My mind is blanking for what they're calling it in local law 92. The sustainable
roofing zone.
Thank you. So it basically will outline, here's the sustainable roofing zone, and noting, whether there's a recreational area that's outside of that, FDNY access, bulkheads and equipment, and so on. And with that, so let me just step back for a minute. If your project already has solar, and there's a lot of new construction projects that are doing solar anyway, what you would need to complete for us is this solar feasibility analysis form and a roof plan showing you're doing solar. And we'll look and say that's a reasonable solar array, that makes sense. For projects that maybe haven't considered solar, this is where this solar screening tool really plays a big role. And this is how a team who's not done solar or hasn't considered it on this project will be able to determine if a project is really feasible. So let me walk into a little more detail about this tool. So this is the tool. You've seen pieces of it in the earlier part of the presentation. It's a really clever tool that Solar One has been developing with us based on a tool they've been using for years. So you can see that, you're looking, you have a roof, you're thinking about doing solar, and you want to know what the payback is and what the cost is. And this tool has a whole lot of embedded inputs. So what do you type in? It's site, address, building type, whether the project is eligible for any of the tax credits or the tax abatements. They're all drop downs in the tool. What's the building height, the usable roof area, that's obviously key, and what kind of or whether or not it's a solar canopy design. And then it has all of the standard utility rates in it. So what's cool is you fill in your information and it spits out this payback and cost estimate for a system. So cool, you can look, and I just entered in a 3,000 square foot system on 123 Main Street. Boom, what do I see? I see a 14-year payback. First thought is, great, this system doesn't meet a 10-year payback. HPD is not going to make me do this installation. But that's really the wrong way to think about it, right? Because we want to see solar on projects, and often it makes a whole lot of sense with a great payback. If you play around with the inputs, right? In this case, I doubled the size of the solar just for, visualization purposes, and changed it into a non-canopy design. Now, obviously that's counterintuitive. You wouldn't usually do those two things at once. But what you can see is that that system, with a couple of minor changes, all of a sudden is now well under a 10-year payback. And that's great. That's great for the building owner. It's great for, reducing the building's carbon and so on. Another thing I want to note is that this tool is pretty flexible. It's set up so that anybody who just has a very basic amount of information on their project can enter some of these inputs and kind of get a sense of how feasible solar will be. It also has advanced inputs you can see on this tab here. So if you know more about a solar system that you have designed and want to kind of get a payback for it, you can change the inputs in the advanced input option. But what's also interesting, because for those of you who are, either HPD staff who are attending or work with us often, which is all of you, we have this button called the HPD Underwriting Tool. And what's interesting about this, and the reason why we developed it, is the 10-year payback is not always the best way for HPD to assess feasibility. We don't exactly look at things the same way. So the same tool, if you press that button, will spit out some other outputs. So you'd click on that and you get the screen, and it pulls all of the information from the inputs page. And then you'd enter a couple other fields of information like the project cost or the TDC, the number of dwelling units, the cap rate, and some other sort of loan constraints. And what it will do is take all that information and spit out the subsidy impact for the project. And you can see down here, that system would require another $44,000 of subsidy. That was the system before, sort of the first pass I showed with the 14-year payback. So you can see that it has some impact on the subsidy, and we're also showing how much carbon is avoided and the value of that carbon. But like the rest of the tool, it's a smart tool. And if you make some changes, in this case, I'm showing the impact of the a LIHTC credit. So you'd plug in 9% credit. Now, obviously, you're not going to just magically get a 9% LIHTC project, but say you forgot to input it, or you just want to see the impact. You play around with that, and you see in this case that the subsidy required for this project is actually less than 0, right? So that really does correspond to with a project that has a much better payback. Had I made the same changes on the initial tool, you would have seen the same thing. So not only does it show that the 10-year payback makes sense, it can show HPD that, hey, this is a no subsidy project when you factor in underwriting to solar and so on. And it makes really a great argument, a great economic argument to install solar. So the last thing I want to do is just kind of walk through the process a little bit in detail. How am I for time? Do I have another minute?
Yeah,
Okay.
Jen, we've got about 8 minutes, including Q&A for your section.
Great. So I'm going to zing through this fast, and then we'll have time for questions. So as you saw in the flow chart above, we really want to see these feasibility analyses like 16 to 8 months prior to loan closing. That is right around the time we think you'll have enough information on your project. You'll be talking to builds, but you'll be far enough along that you have a good sense of how solar can be accommodated on your project. Of course, you should be thinking about it well in advance of that so that your roof design, your building design accommodates solar really well. What will you do? You'll submit the solar feasibility analysis via email to the Green Communities at HPD account with the solar approval form, the roof plan, and the solar screening tool. The screening tool is only required for projects that don't have a solar design in place or are not planning on asking for a local law 92 or 94 waiver. So it's used to help determine whether solar is feasible. We'll review the feasibility analysis. We'll say yes, approved, or no, you can get that waiver because either you can't accommodate it or you don't need it or you have green roof, or we'll notify the team whether a solar consultation or more information is required. And note that we will have technical assistance provided by NYSERDA to help assess and answer questions about use of the tool, solar design, and so on, starting in fall. And finally, a signed solar approval form noting whether it has solar or is waived will be sent back, and you'll need that to kick off the enterprise pre-build process. And I think that completes everything. But now we have plenty of time for Q&A.
Great, thanks, Jen. Looks like just a couple of questions have come in for this group, and I think they're directed at HPD. So let's see. Jen, is HPD funding the solar feasibility analysis?
we are not explicitly funding the feasibility analysis. We do not expect that this will be very challenging. Every design team has an architect who's perfectly well equipped to sketch out on a roof plan what the area is for solar and plug in those numbers into the form. We don't think it's a really heavy lift to do the analysis itself. Does that answer your question?
Let's see, I'll let Andrea respond. Yes, answers the question. Great. And one more so far. What if the roof is being used for open community space applications such as raised bed community gardens? The planting area is less than 90% coverage with walks and paths required for access. Will a waiver be allowed?
So like I said, we're mapping this closely with local law 94 and 92 so that everybody's kind of thinking in that direction. The way they look at it is the sustainable roofing zone is the net roof area after you've accounted for recreational. In our case, yeah, we'd like to see planting up there, so that would be excluded. Any beneficial use would be excluded from the sustainable roofing area. However, oh, and that includes, you know, community spaces beyond garden spaces or green roofs. We want to see productive roofs. However, if we see a roof plan that really looks like an inefficient use of recreational space and planting, we might talk to you further about that, because the goal is really to maximize solar and recreational and so on.
Great. Les, does that answer your question? Super. One more just came in, again for Jen. Do you specifically work on the analysis of tenant energy expenditures in HPD rental buildings as part of the project pro forma?
I'm sorry, I'm not totally clear on what's being asked.
I'm not sure how to clarify here. Let's see. Maybe we'll come back to that one and we'll be sure to either respond after the discussion today or.
But I want to say one thing that I maybe didn't explicitly mention that might address part of that question is we're really assuming that the solar in most of these projects will cover owner costs, right? That's how it ties into underwriting to energy savings by reducing the M&O significantly. And we're really looking to underwrite, you know, up to 80% of the energy savings. That obviously wouldn't happen if energy is going to the tenants. However, we are in favor of applications that do allow the tenants to participate. I don't know if that answers that explicit question, but that's our goal with the solar.
Great. I'll let the individual who shared that question chat out if we need more info. Looks like you've covered it. Thanks, Jen. I think we have a minute for a couple more if we can fit them in. Again, for HPD, my understanding of NYC's community solar capacity is that it's somewhat limited right now. Can you confirm that? And are there any neighborhoods where this will work better than others?
I can actually answer that. When we discussed community solar, we were talking about community solar within a building where the solar array on the roof is distributed to the residents of the building. As Jen just said, this is pretty uncommon, but it is a way to distribute benefit to residents directly if that's a priority for the building owner. That's a separate thing than offsite community solar where there's a larger system somewhere else in the city that people can subscribe to. That's not something that we're discussing right now.
Great. We've had a few more come in, but I think to adhere to our schedule, we'll follow up after the workshop today or at the end of the session. So then I'll kick it over to Frederick when you're ready, Frederick, to talk about the criteria.
Thank you, Shelby. And hello, everyone. So great to have you join us today. I recognize a lot of names, so it's nice to see you all are here. So to follow up on what Jen, Noah, and Annika were going over, I'd like to just take a few minutes to discuss how this solar requirement interplays with our criteria. So as you know, all projects are required to comply with 5.3b, which is to submit the HPD solar approval form. At this point, you have complied with the New York City Overlay. However, there are other opportunities to earn points above and beyond this requirement, either by installing solar, installing green roof, or by taking solar ready and other energy efficiency measures for your project. So if you're required to install solar per HPD requirements, you can go on to follow the requirements of 5.3b to earn points. There are two options here. One, you can earn points by supplying renewable energy to provide a specified percentage of the project's estimated source energy demand, or by providing a percentage of common area meter energy consumption, which kind of ties back to Annika's discussion about community solar and passing benefits on to the residents. And since there is a chance that projects that are required to install solar may not meet the thresholds laid out in the criteria, we are offering 1 point as long as 90% of the project's sustainable roofing zone includes solar. So another great way to earn points and our newly developed Enterprise Green Communities Plus program is by installing solar through Criterion 5.4, as you can see right here, which is achieving zero energy. There are also two options under this criterion. The first is to certify each building in the project to the Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Homes and install renewables and or procure renewable energy, which in sum will produce as much or more energy in a given year than the project is modeled to consume. Option two is to certify the project in a program that requires zero energy performance, such as Bias Plus Source Zero, Passive House Institute Plus, International Living Future, and other programs that we have listed in our criteria, which you can find on the site that Krista shared earlier. If you do take this route, you are not required to submit energy models for 5.1a or b. And if you're installing solar, we strongly encourage you to consider this as a way to earn points and Enterprise Green Communities Plus. So if you're not installing solar because you're meeting the HPD requirements through a different pathway, you're also able to earn points through our solar ready criterion 5.3a. Option one of this criterion points to requires teams to submit a completed Department of Energy Zero Ready Homes PV ready checklist. And then along the lines of moving to zero energy, our criteria items 5.2 and 5.2a and 5.2b. So you all should be familiar with 5.2a as it was slightly updated from 2015. The major difference is that now teams who are following the ERI path in 5.1a or b, you can still earn 5 points for the HERS scores that are 5 lower than the required threshold, but now you only earn 1 point for every additional 2-point decrease. In terms of solar and our discussion today, we do not count PV in calculating the points under 5.2a. And if you earn points under these criteria, you must also follow our dehumidification pathway, which is criterion 7.8. And project teams can also earn points and Enterprise Green Communities Plus under 5.2b, which is moving to zero energy, near zero energy certification, by achieving the Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Homes certification or Passive House Classic or FIAS certification. And lastly, if your team decides to install a green roof, you are able to earn points through 6.5, which is our environmentally responsible material selection, There are 4 components to this criterion that offer points of change in various ways. Today, I'm just going to focus on component number 2, which is roofing. So for New York City, you'll only be able to earn points for the green roof aspect of this requirement, not the cool roof. And if you install a green roof, it must cover 90% of the roofing area. And it's likely that if you choose to pursue this requirement, that you will be able to comply with local laws 92 and 94. So either pursuing 6.5 or local law 92 and 94, you are then eligible to waive the solar requirement of the New York City overlay. And that's what I have for you. So thank you for listening to me talk through these different options as it solar interplays with our criteria. I believe there's great opportunity here to go above and beyond in reducing EUI and carbon through these options. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Krista now for some final remarks and closeout.
Great. Thanks so much, Frederick. So we've had a few more questions come in.
Sure.
At the same time here. One of them was in relation to what you were sharing, Frederick, and that was which criterion can you use to earn points for a green roof installed on a terrace accessible to tenants? And if you'd like to answer that, that'd be great.
I think that would fall under our 6.5 category. I'm getting a little tripped up by the word terrace, so I think as long as it's accessible to all residents, then it should possibly comply.
Yeah, great. And then it looks like Jen has been responding to questions that have been coming in so far, having to do with the previous section. And just to recap a couple of those, there was a question about should the solar screening tool be used to calculate all solar array types available, or focusing on just one type like ballasted, canopy, etc. Annika or Noah or Jen, would y'all like to answer that one?
Should I recap the answer I gave already, which was what we're expecting is that you would submit it based on, the solar array that you think makes sense for that building, which you'd very likely have a predetermined idea. However, it's a great tool to play around with the inputs like I did in the presentation and say, what if I did this? What if I switched from a ballasted system to a rec system or a canopy? Could I get more solar by going over all the equipment or the roof deck? Play around with it because it is so easy to find out what the impacts of your design decisions are. And sure, if you guys want to send 2 or 3 different options to the project team, why not, right? Because it might be that, HPD will look and say, well, sure, it costs a little more, but we really do want to see a shaded canopy over this recreational area. So that's the benefit of the tool. We really want to use it to encourage the best possible solar arrays. But yes, it's a design tool as well as a cost tool.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. And then Noah, it looks like you answered Camilla's question about, can you talk about incentives for old buildings to include solar arrays? But I wonder if you'd like to elaborate on that a little bit for the full group.
Sure, yeah. So fortunately, all of the solar incentives that we presented on today are available for retrofits to existing buildings. The vast majority of solar projects in general are retrofits to existing buildings. So those are available.
And one thing I will say, and I'm hoping for, fingers crossed, is that if there are any stimulus packages, that some of these solar incentives might expand. I mean, that'll depend on a lot of things, but that will really make solar even more feasible across more projects everywhere.
Great. And then new question just in from Les, does your tool account for other construction trade costs other than the actual PV system?
Les, that's a really good question. So the honest answer is sort of. The estimated price per watt is driven by system attributes, including size, complexity, the height of the building, if it's mechanically attached or not. And most typically, the turnkey pricing that solar companies provide will include coordination with the trades, at least for normal anticipated scope items. So, it's conceivable that you could have a project and then your roofer is going to say, well, hey, if they're going to, penetrate my roof and I have to come back and flash, I'm going to charge an arm and a leg. Well, the tool doesn't account for the arm and the leg. The tool is more, there is a higher estimated baseline price for mechanically attached systems because we recognize that there's additional labor costs. I hope that answers the question.
It does also have a prevailing wage input on the tool, which is very relevant for a lot of our projects at HPD.
Mm-hmm. Great. Then one other question that Jen, you weighed in on the chat, but maybe we could just talk a little bit about more here too, was from Zoe, who asked about the value of solar in the 25-year cash flow tab on the screening tool. If it assumes a higher value than what they've seen prior, can they provide the value that they expect?
Yes, so that's why we have the custom input fields. And you can go in and click on those and change inputs if you have, more experience and more knowledge about a system. We do ask that if you are using custom inputs, you do provide a narrative to us explaining like why and how those custom inputs were set. And again, like if there's an arm and a leg situation, because there's a really, unique condition on your building, then, that's where that information can live.
Great.
Although I should say that the value of solar these days often varies from place to place in the city based on the new utility values of solar. So it's possible you've seen a value of solar for one building, but for another building somewhere else in the city, the value would be different. And that's taken into account in the feasibility tool.
Great. Two more have come in. One was a follow-up from Les about the cost conversation. You want to go for it, Noah?
Sure, yeah. So Les's question is, in addition to roofing work, he's also thinking about additional electrical panel and riser work. Most typically, solar companies should include the price of all their AC electrical work in their bid, and the pricing, at least the default price values that are included in this tool, do include kind of turnkey system installation.
Great. And then last question here for now is, we do a lot of affordable projects and would like to expand their toolkit. Solar connections, green roofs, occupied zones with planters. Is there a resource of details and manufacturers of these items? One thing I'll share is like in the green communities criteria, if you go to that website we shared earlier, and go to the different criteria like 5.3b for renewables or 6.5 for green roofs. Each of those criteria has a resources section at the bottom after the requirements with links to find more information about tips and success and things like that with those. So that's one resource, but for more specific manufacturers, et cetera, I wonder, Noah, Annika, Jen, if you all have any favorites that you'd like to share.
Not off the top of my head.
Yeah. I mean, we'd be happy to connect offline, at least on the topic of solar.
Yeah, okay, sounds great. Well, Gabby, if you wouldn't mind putting that evaluation link in the chat box, that would be great. Thank you. And if those of y'all on the line wouldn't mind clicking on that link, filling it out, it's 5 or 6 questions. And if you have any questions that you didn't pose to the group today in this medium, we'll be happy to follow up within the next week with any questions that you do pose in the evaluation. So thanks for taking a couple minutes to do that. And thank you again to Jen, Annika, Noah, Frederick, Shelby, Gabby for today's session. Really appreciate it. And a reminder that this time next week, we'll be joined by Alyssa Knight with the Mayor's Office of Sustainability to talk about how the new energy efficiency and EUI reporting requirements of the overlay correspond with Local Law 97. So hope to see you then. And be on the lookout for an email from Gabby in the next few days with a recording of today's session and the previous sessions of the series too. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a great afternoon. We'll see you all later.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.